So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today is day number 9 of 10 Days of Terror. If you are new to my channel, every single day for 10 days up until Halloween, and on Halloween I am uploading a new true crime video. And we've done 9 days without any real problems, and if you've been around on my channel for a while, you'll know that that ain't never happened before. I feel like me as a human, I just seem to attract problems, which is great. It makes my life so easy. And the amount of times I've tried to do something like this on my channel before, and every single time something has gone wrong. Like, don't get me wrong, we've had little things go wrong this past 9 days. A couple of videos have had to go up an hour later than normal, but nothing too serious, so I'm quite proud of that. Today's case was actually suggested to me from one of my channel members named Kerry, so thank you so much, Kerry. If you want to become a channel member, there's a link in the description. You can suggest cases to me on there. But today we're going to be talking about Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart, which I'd never heard of this case before when Kerry suggested it. And I've never done anything like this case on my channel before, so let's just get into it. So before I do, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This is all just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Hazel Stewart lived in a small town in Northern Ireland named Coleraine with her husband Trevor Buchanan. Hazel just recently got a job at the local Sunday school as a teacher, Trevor was a policeman, and the two of them had a comfortable marriage. They had 2 kids together, they were great parents, they were proud of their little family, but things in the marriage weren't as perfect as they used to be. Trevor seemed very comfortable with the life that they had. He didn't want anything bigger or better. He wasn't overly ambitious in his career or in anything really. And Hazel was. Hazel was the complete opposite. And because of Hazel's new job at the church Sunday school, Hazel and Trevor used to attend a lot of church functions. And that was where they met Colin Howell. Colin Howell was a dentist in Coleraine. He was married to a woman named Leslie Howell, and the two of them had 7 children together. The Howell family were devout Christians. They were always at the forefront of church events and things like that, and they were very respected in the town. But before long, Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart began an affair together behind Trevor and Leslie's backs. And they began sneaking around in the middle of the night and while they were at work and things. At first, Hazel felt quite guilty and she would freak out every time they met up, but Colin reassured her that it must have been God's plan for them. He would always say things like, "It's a gift from God. It wouldn't have happened if God didn't want it to. God wants us to be together." But once Hazel got over that kind of initial guilt, they used to see each other more and more, and they were getting more and more careless with it. They didn't care who saw. Hazel began going to visit Colin at his dentist's office, where everyone knew where he worked. People could see her walking in and out, and they used to have sex in his office, take laughing gas in his office. And then in 1990, Hazel Stewart actually fell pregnant to Colin Howell, and it was quickly decided by the both of them that Hazel could not have this baby. However, due to Ireland's law against abortion, she would have had to fly over to England to be able to get one. And she wanted Colin to go with her. I don't know what excuse they gave to their partners as to why they both went away for a few days. Surely that would have looked suspicious. But the two of them travelled over to England together and got an abortion in the same clinic that Colin's wife Leslie had been to 3 times. But it wasn't long before someone at the church caught on to Colin and Hazel's relationship and told the pastor, who approached both of them separately. He basically told them both that they would be banned from the church if they didn't end this relationship because it was a sin, it was adultery. And not only would they both be banned from the church, but Hazel would also lose her job at the Sunday school. So the two of them told the pastor that they would break off the relationship, but they continued to see each other. And so the pastor just went straight to Colin's wife Leslie, who was pregnant at the time, and just told her what was going on. And when Hazel found out that Leslie knew, she sat down her husband Trevor and told him too. At this point, Colin and Hazel did stop seeing each other, and the two separate couples went to relationship counselling. Although that only lasted a couple of months before Colin and Hazel were back seeing each other. But Trevor and Leslie weren't stupid. They knew that this was still going on, but they loved their partners and they didn't really know what to do. And it was at this point in early 1991 that Colin began saying things to Hazel about possibly getting rid of Leslie and Trevor. Both Trevor and Leslie had expressed to their cheating partners that they didn't want to get a divorce. They wanted to try and make the marriages work. And Colin didn't want to get a divorce either. He thought that would be really hard on the kids to come to terms with a relationship breaking down in front of them. And so Colin suggested to Hazel that they should end their suffering for them humanely. But Hazel didn't take him entirely seriously at first. She thought there was no way that he was actually going to go through with that. That was until the next time she saw him and she realised that he was deadly serious. Colin brought Hazel some sleeping tablets for her part in the murders and told her to crush them up and put them in Trevor's food or in his drink or something, and then Colin would come round and attack Trevor, and hopefully he would stay asleep, or if he did wake up during the attack he'd be too drowsy to fight back. And so Hazel agreed to her part in the murder, and then she asked Colin what they would do if they got caught. And Colin replied, "We're not gonna get caught." So the two of them planned to commit these murders on the night of May 18th, 1991, the same day as one of Colin's children's birthdays. The plan was that Colin would kill his own wife Leslie in their home while Leslie was drugging her own husband Trevor at their house. And then once Trevor had fallen asleep, Colin would go over to their house and kill him second. So that night, Colin got one of his children's baby bottles, cut it in half, and then connected it to a spare garden hose. He then connected that to the exhaust of his car so that he could channel the gas that was coming out of it. And since he and Leslie were having troubles anyway because of the affair, Leslie was staying on the couch downstairs, making it ideal for him to kill her quite far away from the children. So Colin went to the garage, turned on his car, grabbed the other end of this tube and took it all the way to Leslie in the living room. Leslie was asleep on the sofa with the covers already over her head, and so Colin just kind of tucked in the other side of the tube so that under the covers it would all fill with gas. Eventually Leslie woke up a little bit and she was choking, but she was too drowsy to try and get the covers off of her head. Colin ran over and held the covers down over her head anyway, and with her last breath she called out for her 6-year-old son Matthew. Once Hazel had died from asphyxiation from the gas, Colin then put her body in the boot of his car and drove to Hazel's house. But before he did, he grabbed a bunch of family photos from the living room, all kind of framed photos that had the two of them in together, and took them with him. He then arrived at Hazel and Trevor's house, where Hazel let him into the garage and let him park his car in there. Hazel had intentionally parked her car elsewhere that night. At this point, Trevor was already asleep, and so Colin just reattached the tube to the exhaust and took it up to the bedroom. But this time Trevor wasn't asleep with the covers over the top of his head, and so Colin just had to kind of lay the tube next to him where he was sleeping. And because of this, because he could hear and feel the gas coming out by his face, he woke up. And Colin was waiting outside of the bedroom and he heard Trevor inside wake up and start choking, and so Colin ran inside. Trevor was trying to fight Colin off, but because of the sleeping tablets and because of the amount of gas he'd already inhaled, he was quite weak. Anyway, eventually Colin managed to grab the tube and hold it inside of Trevor's mouth until he suffocated too. Colin then put Trevor's body in the boot of his car alongside his wife Leslie's and drove the two bodies to a quiet area a couple of miles away named Castle Rock. He parked the car in a quiet place and then dragged Trevor's body from the boot and into the driver's seat, and even put one of his hands on the steering wheel to make it look real. He left Leslie's body lying in the boot, but he arranged those family photos that he grabbed from the house around her to make it look as though she was looking at those in her last moments. Colin had also grabbed a cassette tape and headphones from home that had Leslie's favourite song on it that she used to listen to all the time. And before he left, he turned on this cassette and put the headphones on Leslie's head to make it look as though she was listening to her favourite song one last time. He then started the ignition of the car and used an old vacuum part to channel the gas from the exhaust into the boot of the car, making this look like a suicide pact. The plot that Colin and Hazel were hoping that police would pick up on was two heartbroken lovers find out that their partners have been cheating on them with each other, and so they decide to kill themselves together. The next morning around 7 AM, Colin Howell reported his wife Leslie missing to police and said that he thought she could be with Trevor Buchanan. After just a couple of hours, the car with both bodies in was found, and Colin and Hazel's plan worked. Both deaths were ruled as suicides. And Colin and Hazel actually came up with their own stories of what happened that night to make it seem more believable. Hazel said that she was asleep and woke up in the middle of the night after hearing two voices downstairs. One of them was Trevor's and the other one seemed to be Leslie's. But Hazel said she just went back to sleep because she and Leslie still were on talking terms, so there was no point in going down and saying hi to her or whatever. And obviously Colin had the fact that Leslie had been staying on the sofa downstairs for the past few nights, so he could say that was why he didn't notice her leave in the middle of the night. Colin Howell even left a fake suicide note that his wife Leslie supposedly left behind, just kind of thanking him for all all the happier times in their marriage and saying that she was done. After their partners' deaths, Colin and Hazel were actually banned from the church that they attended because it was deemed that they were the reason for their suicides. And a lot of people in the town had their suspicions, including police, that maybe it wasn't suicide, maybe their partners had killed them. But there was absolutely no physical evidence to say this. It just seemed too perfect that both of their partners decided to kill themselves so then they could be together. Meanwhile, Colin and Hazel were sneaking around still because obviously they couldn't be seen together now at all in public, even just as friends. So they were going around to each other's houses in the middle of the night and things, and Hazel once again was full of guilt. But this time it was even worse than the first time. It even got to the point where Hazel couldn't have sex with Colin unless she was drugged. Hazel would give Colin permission to inject her with drugs that he would use in his dental practice, just so that she was a bit calmer and so that they were able to actually continue this affair. But eventually the guilt was just too much for Hazel, and the two of them just kind of faded from each other. They saw each other less and less. They never actually officially broke up. I mean, they were never officially anything, but they never kind of spoke about it. They just kind of continued to see each other less. Eventually, during this period of time where they were kind of distancing themselves from each other, Hazel began seeing a new man, and Colin was furious. That was until he met a woman himself. And eventually both new couples ended up getting married and having children together. Both of them. Even though they'd killed their spouses to be together, they were even together in the end. And then in 1998, 7 years after the murders, Colin Howell decided to come clean to his new wife and admit to the murders. She was obviously horrified, but they'd just had a child together. She'd been married to him for years at this point, and she loved him. And so she promised not to go to authorities. Almost a decade later, in 2007, Colin Howell fell victim to a get-rich-quick scam. When his wife Leslie committed suicide, he received £400,000 from the life insurance policy, and in a space of 6 months, he spent $350,000 of that in this get-rich-quick scam. He sold 2 of his dental practices, he scammed multiple of his patients, all so that he could put more money into this get-rich-quick scam. And this scam promised to make him millions, yet all Colin received were some silver coins that were worth £30. That same year, Colin's now 22-year-old son Matthew, that same son whose name Leslie called out in her dying breath, actually died of an accident. He was over in Russia staying on the top floor of an apartment block, and he came out of his apartment and looked down the stairwell to shout to his friend when he lost his footing and fell 40 feet down the stairwell to his death. And Colin was devastated. He felt as though Matthew's death was his fault and it was a punishment from God for all of these sins. He also felt that the fact he'd lost all of his money was also a punishment from God, and he felt that these punishments were just going to keep happening and keep getting worse unless he confessed to his sins. So that's exactly what he did. Colin Howell decided to admit to everything, including some things that he'd never told anyone about. So Colin and his second wife Kyle went and sat down with some police where he was finally going to admit to these murders. But before he did, he turned to Kyle and said that he had a confession to make to her first. He said that he'd been unfaithful to her, but this time it wasn't an affair. He was actually sexually assaulting his dentist patients while they were sedated. And like I said, he'd also scammed multiple patients out of over £200,000 worth of treatments that he wasn't going to give them, just so that he could put that money into his get-rich-quick scam. He then turned to the police officers and admitted to killing Leslie and Trevor and told them everything, right from the planning all the way through to making it look like a suicide. So police went and arrested Hazel Stewart, who completely denied her part in the murders and said that she actually feared Colin Howell. And that's why she let him kill Trevor, because she was scared that if she didn't, he would try and kill her and her children. But Colin Howell testified against her in court, saying that she was complicit with the murders all the way through, right from the planning all the way to burning evidence afterwards. Hazel Stewart pled not guilty to the murders but was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years. The judge said that Hazel had plenty of opportunities to stop Colin from doing this. She could have gone to the police as soon as he brought it up. She could have locked the door. She could have not let him into the garage. She could have always gone and turned the car off. She could have shouted to a neighbour to help. But she didn't do any of these things because she wanted him to kill her husband, because she wanted wanted to be with him. She was equally as complicit in these murders as he was. Colin Howell, on the other hand, just pled guilty to the murders. He knew he wasn't getting away with it, and so he got life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. He also pled guilty to the sexual assaults against his patients. He was stripped of his NHS pension money, and he was sentenced to a further 5.5 years. But yeah, that completes this video. I feel like this was kind of short, but there isn't all that much on the internet about this one. There is a 4-part ITV drama named The Secret about this case. I haven't watched it, but I saw it when I was researching for this. I saw it advertised and stuff. So if you do want to go and watch that, if you're interested by this case, then I'm sure that's quite good. Do keep in mind while you're watching it that it is a drama though, because I saw that one of Colin and Leslie's children came out and said that a lot of things were inaccurate and over-dramatised, obviously. Obviously, if they're going to make it into a drama, they need to make it more interesting, but they've also added in a couple of things that aren't quite true to the story, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that completes this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me. We only have one day left of 10 Days of Terror tomorrow, but we've done 9 so far. I'm all proud of that. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.